Hello, everyone, and welcome back to 305 Insights. I'm your host, Alan Somerton. I've kind of been forgetting to say that over the past few podcasts, but friendly reminder of who I am. Today, we're going to continue our college football preview, and we're looking at the Southeastern Conference, the SEC. As usual, we're going to go through the top tier teams, sleeper teams, teams in trouble, most impactful players, and biggest games. The top tier teams in the SEC there's a clear one, and then there's one that everybody, I believe, hopes is back, and you know where we're going with that. Once we say that phrase, and it's Georgia and Texas. Possibly the only team that has higher expectations than Ohio State is Georgia. Regardless of the depth of the SEC, Georgia is the most talented team in the country. With Kirby Smart at the helm, they have constantly finished at least in the top 3 in high school recruiting year after year. And they do supplement in the transfer portal as well. Now, they do lose a lot of talent because of that depth. And this might be one of those years where it's finally tested, because we've had press conferences where Kirby Smart has spoken about this out loud and making sure that the media, national media, understand what's going on at Georgia, possibly to reduce expectations in some sort of manner or to motivate the younger kids. But it could be one of the years where Georgia, even though I just said they are the most talented team, depth might be an issue, and Kirby Smart and company might be forced to play younger players before they are ready to actually see the field. However, Georgia is one of the odds-on favorite to win the college football national championship, and for very good reason. There was always the notion that, under Mark Richt and previous staffs, that Georgia was a sleeping giant. Even though under Mark Richt they had consistent 9-10 win seasons, and the blips here and there where they would go 12-1, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a little more difficult in the BCS era where only 2 teams made the college national championship game. Now under Kirby Smart, this is a well-oiled machine at this point, and he is the man to take over the mantle from Nick Saban as the most dominant head coach in college football. Next, we got Texas. And like I said, a lot of people are hoping Texas is back, especially now that they've transitioned to the SEC. And are they back under Steve Sarkisian? They probably have the best QB room in the country with Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning. Their defense, even though they lost 2 defensive linemen in Byron Murphy and Sweat, I can't remember his first name off the top of my head, they still have what many considered a loaded defense. And this just means playoff expectations in Austin, Texas. There are certain out-of-conference schedules a la Michigan that really are going to test whether Texas is one of the elite teams in the country. But again, you have a lot of talent on both sides of the ball. You have a really good, borderline brilliant play caller in Steve Sarkisian. This has got to be the year for Texas to continue its ascension. They made the college football playoffs last year. Now they're in a deeper league compared to the Big 12 in terms of top-end teams. They can't afford the slip-ups that they would have every once in a while. You pretty much had to worry about Oklahoma, and that was about it. But sometimes they would find a way to lose to TCU. They would find a way to Oklahoma State. they will get upset by Kansas State, something along those lines. You can't afford that in the SEC. So, talent-wise, coaching-wise, there is a proof of concept there. It's going to be interesting to see how they carry that over into the SEC. Sleeper teams, I'm going to go with Tennessee and Texas A&M. With Tennessee, they might have found their head coach in Josh Heupel. And this is probably his most talented team that he's had since he's been there. The only thing that they have to worry about is their QB ready? And we're talking about the young one, Nico. He's been there for a year now. He sat behind Milton last year. He was, I believe, the number one QB recruit, if not the number one pocket passer QB in the nation coming out of high school. And Heupel managed to get him to commit to Tennessee. This is probably his best defense. He's got a really good defensive line. Secondary is a little questionable, but again, there's enough talent up front to kind of mitigate that, hopefully. If Nico is a good quarterback, Tennessee can go kind of stay in that consistent 8-4, 9-3 that they've kind of established under Josh Heupel. If he's able to take that next step during the year, Tennessee could be a very dangerous team. And that's why, again, they're a sleeper because we don't know how the young quarterback is going to fare across a really good schedule. It's somewhat unfair. It's almost the same thing we talked about earlier with Dylan Raiola at Nebraska, except he's a true freshman versus a redshirt freshman. The pressure that's put on these shoulders of these kids at QB, where there's a lot of expectations for the teams overall, or a lot of future expectations in the sense of hope for Nebraska. Are they able to handle it at such a young age? We'll see. If he does it, if he is able to handle it, Tennessee is going to make the college football playoffs. There's that much talent on the team. And Josh Heupel calling the plays. You've seen what he can do with a good quarterback in the sense of was it Hendon Hooker a few years ago before he got injured? I'm not saying Joe Milton's a terrible quarterback, but there's a lack of touch with Joe Milton. Rocket arm, one of the best arms you'll ever see. But the accuracy in the sense of just being able to understand, to have that touch in the pass for certain plays wasn't always there, and that's what kind of limited Tennessee in terms of its offensive execution. The other team we were talking about was Texas A&M. I mean, Mike Elko has proven that he is a good head coach in the sense of what he was able to accomplish at Duke, what he was able to build there, and what he was able to accomplish. Now, you did lose some talent at Texas A&M to the transfer portal. However, you did also gain, and I don't want to say there was a net gain from the transfer portal, but this is also going to be one of the most talented defensive lines in the country, despite what you lost. And Elko is familiar with the pressures and expectations and overall culture that is Texas A&M. I don't want to say it's a unique thing because there's a lot of colleges that pride themselves on being the focal point of the city, that pride themselves on tradition, et cetera, et cetera. But Texas A&M is unique in the sense that they're one of the richest universities in the nation in terms of how much revenue they generate. There is an expectation that money can buy a national championship at this point, and especially with the advent of NIL over the past few years, you saw it in that, even though Jimbo denies it, you saw it in that 2022 recruiting class where they got a bunch of 5 stars who are clearly the number one recruiting class in the nation. Didn't really add up to wins. However, I do think Elko is going to put Texas A&M in the right direction. There is an understanding that they have to modernize the offense and make sure the defense is putting the talent in a position to succeed. And Elko can do that with his tenure previously as a defensive coordinator at A&M, as well as understanding where the offense needs to be. Teams in trouble. I'm going to save the hated ones for last, but we're going to lead off with Arkansas and Sam Pittman. Pittman went 9-4 in that magical 2021 season, but ever since then, he's gone 11-14, and more importantly, he's gone 4-12 in the SEC. It's interesting because they also hired blanking for a moment. Sorry, they hired former Arkansas coach Bobby Petrino as the offensive coordinator, which is almost basically, to me, a sure bet that if Pittman gets fired, we know who's taking over midseason, and that's Bobby Petrino. And who would have thought all those years ago with that motorcycle incident that Petrino would be back in Arkansas? But here we are. So, I mean, Pittman was a great story, but the shine's starting to come off. And if he isn't able to produce a winning season, then Arkansas is going in a different direction. Whether that is realistic or not in this new SEC, money talks. And you saw what they did with the college basketball program there in getting their new head coach. Oh my God, I'm blanking on his name. The guy from Kentucky. And you paid him all this money to leave the bluest of blue bloods in John Calipari, leaving Kentucky to go coach at Arkansas. They are willing to spend the money to be successful, and they expect their football program to do the same, to perform at a more than adequate level. Our favorite program to hate on in this podcast is in trouble this year, and that's Florida and Billy Napier. One of the most brutal schedules in the country, plus a lack of blue chip depth and talent. It's going to take nothing short of a miracle for this team to get to 6-6. And a third losing season at Florida will only lead to a new head coach. I mean, this has been talked about ad nauseum with the University of Florida and their schedule. They've got a very important game 1 against the Miami Hurricanes. Luckily, that is at the Swamp, which should make a difference. But again, folks, the last 5 games, it's going to be, you have a bye week on the 26th of October. Then you face Georgia in the neutral site game in Jacksonville, world's largest cocktail party. Then you go at Texas. Then you face LSU. Then you face Ole Miss. Then you're at Florida State. Those are all ranked teams. I think even if Florida State, if they beat Boston College, at 1-1, they're still going to be ranked. But currently, Georgia's number 1 team, Texas number 4 team, LSU number 13, Ole Miss number 6, Florida's at number 10, even though they'll drop. Those are 5 teams that you expect to finish in the top 25. And that's the end of your schedule. So you're going to have to find wins against Kentucky, Tennessee, UCF, Mississippi State, A&M, Samford, Miami. I mean, I don't want to dive too deep in this because it's not just focusing on one team, but I can't resist. Miami, that's an L. Samford, that's a win. Texas A&M, that's an L. You're already at 1-2. Mississippi State, you can probably win that game. So you're at 2-2 on your first bye week. UCF, that's honestly going to be a tougher game than most people expect, but let's give them that. So you're at 3 wins. At Tennessee, that's a loss. Kentucky, maybe. Let's just give them Kentucky. You're at 4 wins. Now, are you going to beat Florida State, Ole Miss, LSU, Texas, or Georgia? Yeah, I'm not sure about that. So, yeah, Billy Napier, Sunbelt Billy, he's in trouble. Most impactful players, LSU linebacker / DN Harold Perkins. If LSU has any shot in this updated SEC, Perkins will have to lead the new look defense. They need to figure out how they're properly going to play him. You saw in his first season, they kind of let him loose, a la Micah Parsons when he went to the Cowboys, how they kind of used him more as primarily a pass rusher. And then the second year, they kind of did a massive switch in the sense of using him as more of a traditional linebacker. And you saw, I don't want to say fall off, but you saw the change in production. And it wasn't positive. So figuring out what you're doing with Perkins is going to go a long way into seeing if this LSU defense is truly improved. Georgia QB Carson Beck. He's a possible top pick in the 2025 NFL Draft. And he's going to be leading the most talented team in the deepest conference. And he's going to be the most impactful because you may not have the playmakers that you've had in the past on offense, with like the Brock Bowers or, certain players at wide receivers. I know like George Pickens is old compared to this team. So you might not have those explosive name brands that people have come to expect from Georgia. So they're going to lean more on Carson Beck. There's more responsibility on Beck this year. And I think he can handle it. And as we talk about extensively with Tennessee, we've got their QB Nico here. And he's going to be the difference between Rocky Top playing out in the college football playoffs or just being a good team. Biggest games, Tennessee at Oklahoma, September 21st. Georgia at Alabama, September 28th. I mean, that's Oklahoma getting their first SEC opponent at home. Again, we've spoken about in the past. Is that stadium really that hard of a place to play, or has it been the talent level that goes there? Because again, like we spoke about previously, you do not face Texas there. You face Texas at a neutral site. You have an inherent talent advantage against everyone else over the past decades in the Big 12. So you pretty much had to worry about Bedlam. And, I mean, that rivalry is incredibly one-sided in terms of facing Oklahoma State every other year in that stadium. And so this is going to be a true test of Oklahoma's home field advantage. It has gained a reputation that, in my mind, isn't necessarily earned. So we'll see this year and in the coming years how the Sooner faithful defend their field. Georgia Alabama is obviously big because A, it's Georgia Alabama, and B, it's the new era at Alabama. Is this where Kirby Smart just immediately shows Kalen DeBoer, this is a different beast here, and I'm the new sheriff in town now that Nick Saban's gone. Texas at Texas A&M, the rivalry is back November 30th. They've been playing that for, was it over 100 years or almost 100 years? And then it was gone once Texas basically forced Texas A&M to move out of the Big 12 because of the Longhorn Network. And now I think that's going to be a fun rivalry game to see back on the schedule. Georgia at Texas. It's crazy to think that the top two teams. It's almost like Ohio State and Oregon that they're going to be playing in the regular season, and these are in the same sense as Ohio State and Oregon, except I think Texas is considered slightly better than Oregon. That the regular season game is going to have the biggest impact on the college football season. Those are, without a doubt, without a shadow of a doubt, the two biggest games on the schedule. Ohio State and Oregon, and Georgia and Texas. And Georgia is going to Texas. Ole Miss at LSU, October 12th. Is this the matchup of unrealistic expectations? Remember, Ole Miss is going to be ranked number 6 going into the season. LSU is ranked 13th. Can they live up to those hypes and expectations? I'm not sure, but there's a lot of talent at Ole Miss. LSU is kind of rebuilding from a loss of 2 number 1 wide receivers, top tier quarterback, revamping the defense. Who knows where that will go? So, kind of alluded to it in the previous podcast with the Big Ten versus the SEC. This is basically the two conferences that the 12-team college football playoff was built for. And at least going into this year, I believe that, as much as it pains me to say it, the SEC is a deeper league in the sense of how many top-tier programs that they can offer the college football playoffs. You obviously have Georgia and Texas. Then, how does Kalen DeBoer handle Alabama? There's enough talent there for them to be a really good team. Now, they're not going to run roughshod over everybody like they have in the past, but I think they're going to be fine. So there's 3 teams there. Then you have the likes of Ole Miss. Can Ole Miss live up to expectations? They only have to be one of the 12 best teams in the country. Can Tennessee live up to that? Can Texas A&M take some steps forward? Can LSU live up to expectations? I mean, when you go toe-to-toe, the Big Ten pretty much has Ohio State, Oregon, and then you're going to Penn State and Michigan. And Michigan's got a brutal schedule with a lot of talent that was lost. And, of course, they do have talent coming back. But, again, Texas, Michigan, how's that going to play out? How is Michigan going up against Ohio State's NIL team at this point? How is that going to play out? You know, is Penn State really going to go 9-3, 10-2 again? So the high end, the top tier level of each conference matches up. But I believe there's 1 or 2 extra teams in the SEC who can make more noise than the Big Ten right now. Now, if you look into the future and see that, you know, if USC comes back, if Washington continues to perform at a high level, and you get one of those Wisconsin, Iowa teams or whatever to really actually be a threat and not just be a, you know, typical Big Ten team that doesn't really scare anybody. I mean, Iowa was a good team last year, but how many teams could Iowa have actually beaten in the top 15 of the country? So with that offense that they have, and it's not like it's going to be improved this year, but again, just thinking that SEC has a slight edge in terms of the amount of teams that could actually make the college football playoff, but actually make some noise in it as well. So that wraps it up for this episode. We got one more conference to review, saving the best for last. And I only say that because it has Miami and FSU in it, and that's the ACC. So, little longer episode than the other two. because, again, the type of teams that we had to cover and the expectations attached to them. And we really didn't talk much about Alabama or Auburn or, well, no, you know, not the top of Mississippi State or Vanderbilt. So, yeah, great episode this. And we got one more, like I said, with the ACC. So you guys know the drill as we're approaching the end. Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube. Like, subscribe, follow, offer feedback if you want. We're here to listen to you. And we, like I said, a few more episodes to churn out. College football weekend is upon us. And we'll have reviews of the UM game and the FSU game, which is played out on Saturday and Monday. And we might have a completely separate episode for the biggest games of the week or just things that caught my eye and is worth discussion. So thanks for stopping by on this one, folks. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time here on 305 Insights.